We've all walked past someone cleaning a floor without a second glance. The person you ignored today might be running the company tomorrow. This is exactly what happened at First Capital Trust Bank. If you've ever felt overlooked or underestimated, Miguel Reyes' journey from janitor to CEO will remind you that where you start doesn't determine where you finish. Stay with me to discover how one man's dignity in the face of invisibility changed not just his life, but an entire community. The fluorescent lights of First Capital Trust flickered on at 4:30 a.m., illuminating the marble floors that Miguel Reyes would spend the next 3 hours polishing to perfection. While the financial district of the city still slumbered, Miguel moved methodically through the cavernous banking hall, his reflection ghosting across the gleaming surfaces beneath him. At 42, Miguel's hands were calloused from 15 years of custodial work, his back permanently curved from bending over mops and vacuums. The bank executives who would later stride across his freshly cleaned floors rarely noticed him. He had mastered the art of invisibility that came with the uniform of the working poor. Buenos dias, Miguel called Rosita, the security guard, one of the few people who acknowledged his existence during these early morning hours. Buenos dias, he replied with a warm smile that crinkled the corners of his eyes. Despite everything, Miguel maintained a dignity that no amount of social invisibility could erode. What the bankers in their tailored suits didn't know was that Miguel held 2 master's degrees from his home country, one in economics and another in business administration. They couldn't see that before political instability had forced him to flee with nothing but his family's safety in mind, he had been on track to become the financial controller for a major corporation. Now, in America, those credentials meant nothing without the right connections, the right accent, the right opportunities. So he cleaned. He cleaned and he observed. "Dad, why do you still work there?" his daughter Lucia had asked just yesterday. At 17, she was brilliant and uncompromising, a scholarship student at the local prep school where she stood out not just for her academic excellence, but for her fierce awareness of inequality. Because honest work is honest work, Miguel had replied, the same answer he'd given for years. But lately, there was something more brewing beneath his patient exterior. As Miguel moved his mop across the executive floor that morning, he paused outside the glass-walled conference room where charts and presentation materials remained from yesterday's emergency meeting. The bank was in trouble. He could tell from the tense faces of the executives who had stayed late, from the hushed, urgent conversations that fell silent when the cleaning staff entered rooms. Miguel didn't need to eavesdrop to understand what was happening. He could read the quarterly reports left carelessly on desks, interpret the financial statements that executives reviewed in the bank's spacious lobby, while waiting for colleagues. First Capital Trust was hemorrhaging money from poor investment decisions and failing to adapt to changing market conditions. The previous night, he had overheard Harrison Phillips, the CEO, discussing the need for drastic measures with the board. "We need to cut staff by 30%, Phillips had insisted, his voice carrying into the hallway where Miguel was emptying trash bins. Started with maintenance and working our way up. Miguel's heart had sunk. Not for himself. He had been saving carefully and taking online courses at night to update his financial knowledge. But for Rosita, for Eduardo who cleaned the bathrooms, for Mrs. Chun who tended the small garden in the bank's atrium. People with families, with dreams, with nowhere else to go. In the neighborhood where Miguel lived, a vibrant but struggling community of immigrants, service workers, and young families priced out of better areas. First Capital Trust was already viewed with suspicion. The bank had taken over 3 local businesses for expansion, then left the spaces vacant. Their community reinvestment programs existed only on paper. That afternoon, after his cleaning shift ended, Miguel walked to his second job at the community center, where he taught financial literacy classes. The center operated out of a converted church basement, with mismatched furniture and outdated computers donated by local businesses. Today we're going to talk about community banking. Miguel told a room of attentive faces. Elderly residents trying to avoid predatory lenders, young parents hoping to save for homes, small business owners struggling to get loans. The big banks see numbers, not people, he explained, drawing from 15 years of watching First Capital Trust operate from the inside. But money should serve communities, not the other way around. After class, Carmen Diaz, the center's director, approached him. "Miguel, The Neighborhood Credit Union Committee is meeting tonight. We could use someone with your knowledge. Miguel hesitated. His evening class at the community college started in an hour, another step in his slow, steady plan to rebuild his career. But the urgency in Carmen's eyes made him reconsider. "What's happened?" he asked. "The credit union application has stalled again. The regulators are asking for more detailed financial projections and risk assessments. Nobody on the committee has that expertise." Carmen sighed. "We've been working on this for 2 years, Miguel. People in this neighborhood need financial services that don't exploit them." Miguel thought of the banking hall he had polished that morning, how its grandeur was designed to intimidate rather than welcome ordinary people. He thought of the predatory loans his neighbors signed because they had no alternatives, of the check-cashing services that took significant portions of people's hard-earned wages. "I'll be there," he said. That evening, in a room above the neighborhood bodega, Miguel found himself facing 12 community members who had been fighting to establish a credit union for the neighborhood. Their plans were ambitious but disorganized, their financial projections amateurish. "The problem isn't your vision," Miguel said after reviewing their materials. "It's how you're presenting it to regulators. You need to speak their language." For the next 3 hours, Miguel guided them through restructuring their proposal. As his confidence grew, he felt something awakening in him, knowledge and skills that had lain dormant for years, waiting for the right moment. "Where did you learn all this?" asked Javier, a plumber who had been leading the credit union effort. Miguel smiled ruefully. "In another life." That night, returning home to the small apartment he shared with Lucia, Miguel found his daughter studying at the kitchen table. "You're home late," she said without looking up from her textbooks. "I was helping with the neighborhood credit union project," he replied, setting down his backpack heavy with financial textbooks. "They need someone who understands banking regulations." Now Lucia did look up, her expression curious. "And that's you?" Miguel hesitated, then nodded. For years, he had compartmentalized his life, the educated professional he had been, the invisible janitor he had become. He had never wanted Lucia to feel ashamed of what he did for a living, but he also hadn't shared much about his past. "In Venezuela, before we came here, I worked in finance," he said quietly. "I was good at it." "Then why are you mopping floors of that bank?" Lucia asked, the question direct and unsparing, in the way only teenagers can manage. Miguel sat across from her. "Because when we came here, my degrees weren't recognized. Because taking the janitor job was the fastest way to put food on the table. Because starting over is hard." He paused. "But maybe it's time to try again differently." That night, unable to sleep, Miguel pulled out the notebook where he had been recording his observations about First Capital Trust operations for years. What had started as a way to keep his mind engaged while doing menial work had evolved into a detailed analysis of the bank's strengths and weaknesses. Miguel could see clearly what the executives could not, how disconnected they were from the communities they supposedly serve, how their focus on corporate clients had left them vulnerable to market shifts, how their failure to adapt to digital banking was costing them the next generation of customers. And as dawn broke, illuminating the warm but dignified faces of his neighborhood as people headed to early shifts, Miguel had an idea, one that seemed impossible, audacious, perhaps even foolish. But what if it wasn't? What if the man who cleaned the bank's floors understood its problems and their solutions better than anyone else? Miguel's revelation that night wasn't just about personal ambition. It was about reimagining what financial institutions could be in communities like his. With his intimate knowledge of both worlds, he was uniquely positioned to bridge them. But transformations, especially ones that challenge entrenched systems, never follow a straight line. Let's continue this journey of persistence, community power, and the courage to envision something better. The Neighborhood Credit Union Committee met weekly after that first night, with Miguel becoming its unofficial financial strategist. What had begun as casual advice evolved into leadership as his expertise became evident. The group gathered in different locations: Carmen's living room, the back of Javier's plumbing shop, the community center after hours. Spaces that lacked the imposing architecture of First Capital Trust, but hummed with genuine purpose. "We need to think differently," Miguel explained one evening, spreading spreadsheets across a folding table. Traditional banks see our neighborhood as high risk because they're using the wrong metrics. They count credit scores, but not character. They measure assets, but not community ties. Gloria, who ran a small tailoring business, nodded vigorously. My business has operated for 15 years without a single missed payment on anything, but banks still treat me like I'm a gamble. Exactly, Miguel replied. So our credit union needs to pioneer different evaluation methods, ones that recognize the strength and resilience in this community. As weeks passed, Miguel's double life grew increasingly complicated. By day, he cleaned the gleaming floors of First Capital Trust, invisible to executives whose coffee cups he emptied. By evening, he was emerging as a community leader, applying his education and insights to build an alternative financial model. The strain showed in the dark circles under his eyes and in his increasingly distracted demeanor at work. One morning, as he polished the brass nameplate outside the CEO's office, Harrison Phillips himself emerged unexpectedly. "You missed a spot," Phillips said without making eye contact, gesturing vaguely at the already immaculate surface. Miguel nodded respectfully, though inside he felt a flicker of indignation. This man, who couldn't be bothered to learn his name after years of service, was making decisions that would affect countless lives in the community, including potentially ending Miguel's employment. That same afternoon, the layoff rumors intensified as men in expensive suits, clearly from corporate headquarters, toured the building with tablets, making notes about each department. Miguel recognized the telltale signs of downsizing from his previous corporate life. The custodial staff exchanged nervous glances during their break. "They're going to clean house," Eduardo murmured, the irony of his choice of words not lost on anyone. "Maybe it's time we all had a backup plan," Miguel suggested carefully. Rosita snorted. "Like what? At my age, with my English? This job is all I have." The weight of her words stayed with Miguel as he attended the credit union committee meeting that evening. The regulatory application was progressing, but slowly. They needed more capital, more community buy-in, and more time, all things in short supply. "We should approach some of the small business owners," suggested Javier. "If they commit to moving their accounts to us once we open, it strengthens our application." Miguel nodded thoughtfully. "And we need to document the bank desert in this area. How many people are underserved? The regulators need to understand we're filling a critical need." After the meeting, Carmen pulled Miguel aside. "You know, there's a foundation offering grants for community financial projects. The deadline is next month." "How much?" Miguel asked. "Up to $250,000 for the right proposal. But it would need to be exceptional." Miguel's mind raced. With that kind of seed money, they could accelerate their timeline significantly. "I'll draft something," he promised. At home that night, Lucia found him surrounded by papers at their small kitchen table, working through financial projections. "Dad, when was the last time you slept more than 5 hours?" she asked, concerned. Miguel rubbed his eyes. "I'll sleep when the grant proposal is finished." Lucia sat across from him, studying the papers. "This is serious, isn't it? You're really trying to start a bank." "A credit union," he corrected gently. "Owned by its members, not shareholders. And yes, it's serious." Lucia was quiet for a moment, then asked, "How can I help?" Miguel looked up in surprise. His daughter had always been supportive but distant from his community work, focused on her studies and her own path forward. "You want to help?" She nodded, suddenly looking vulnerable. "In school, they're always talking about making a difference, but it's all so abstract. This is real. This can help our neighbors." Together, they began crafting the narrative section of the grant proposal, with Lucia bringing fresh perspectives on how young people in the community were affected by predatory financial services. Working alongside his daughter, Miguel felt a surge of purpose that transcended his personal ambitions. This wasn't just about reclaiming his professional identity. It was about creating something lasting for the next generation. The following week brought unwelcome news at First Capital Trust. Management announced that the bank would be restructuring operations to enhance efficiency. Corporate speak for layoffs. The first round would affect support staff, including half the custodial team. Miguel was spared in the initial cuts, but Eduardo and 2 others weren't so fortunate. As he helped Eduardo clean out his locker, the older man fought back tears. 15 years, Eduardo said quietly. 15 years, and they give me 2 week severance. Miguel placed a hand on his shoulder. Come to the community center tomorrow. We're building something different. When Eduardo showed up at the next credit union meeting, he wasn't alone. He brought 3 other recently laid-off bank employees, each with intimate knowledge of how First Capital Trust operated and how it failed to serve their community. The credit union committee expanded, drawing strength from adversity. Miguel began to understand that what they were creating wasn't just an alternative financial institution. It was becoming a movement for economic dignity in their neighborhood. As spring turned to summer, Miguel's grant application advanced to the final round. The foundation requested a presentation, but it coincided with his morning shift at the bank. After years of perfect attendance, he requested his first day off. The presentation room was nothing like the opulent conference rooms at First Capital Trust. In a converted warehouse space that housed the foundation's offices, Miguel and Carmen stood before a panel of evaluators, their proposed credit union model displayed on a portable projector. Financial institutions have traditionally extracted wealth from communities like ours, Miguel explained, his voice growing stronger with each word. Our model reverses that flow. We retain capital locally, build financial literacy, and create pathways to homeownership and small business development. One evaluator leaned forward. It's an ambitious model. What makes you qualified to lead it? Miguel hesitated, then made a decision. For too long, he had compartmentalized his life, the educated professional from his past and the invisible janitor of his present. It was time to claim his whole story. I hold master's degrees in economics and business administration, he stated simply. I've spent 15 years observing banking operations from the inside while building relationships in my community. I understand both worlds in ways few others can. The room fell silent, evaluators exchanging glances. Then the questions began, technical, challenging, probing the depth of his knowledge. For the first time in years, Miguel was being seen for his mind rather than his mop, and he rose to the occasion brilliantly. 2 weeks later, the foundation called. They had won the grant. The celebration at the community center that evening was jubilant. Residents from across the neighborhood gathered, small business owners, families, elderly longtime residents, and young professionals who had grown up there. They shared food and dreams for what financial empowerment could mean for their community. To Neighborhood First Credit Union, Carmen toasted, raising a paper cup of sparkling cider. And to Miguel, who reminded us that expertise can come from unexpected places. The room echoed with applause, and Miguel felt a strange mixture of pride and discomfort at the attention. For years, he had cultivated invisibility as a survival strategy. Being seen, truly seen, was both exhilarating and terrifying. As the celebration continued, Miguel stepped outside for a moment of quiet reflection. Looking down the street toward the imposing silhouette of First Capital Trust in the distance, he contemplated the journey ahead. The grant was just the beginning. They would need regulatory approval, physical space, technology systems, and most importantly, the community's trust. His phone buzzed with a text from Lucia. "Where are you? People are looking for you." As he turned to go back inside, Miguel noticed a familiar figure approaching. Harrison Phillips, the CEO of First Capital Trust, dressed casually in weekend attire, apparently on his way to the upscale restaurant down the block. Their eyes met for an instant, the bank executive and the janitor, before Phillips looked away, clearly not recognizing Miguel outside his uniform. The moment crystallized everything that was wrong with the banking system they were trying to change, the inability to see human potential beyond preconceived categories. Back inside the community center, Miguel rejoined the celebration with renewed determination. These were his people. This was his purpose. The path forward wouldn't be easy, but they would walk it together, step by deliberate step. The next morning, Miguel arrived at First Capital Trust for his cleaning shift, moving through a familiar routine with fresh perspective. The bank's marble floors and mahogany desks no longer intimidated him. He could now see clearly that institutions were simply structures created by people and could be recreated when they failed to serve their purpose. As he polished the brass plaque bearing the bank's name, Miguel allowed himself a moment of audacious dreaming. What would this space look like transformed into a financial institution that truly served his community? What would it mean for his neighbors to walk through these doors and feel welcome rather than judged? He didn't yet know that in less than a decade, he would find out. As we conclude Miguel's journey, we'll witness how personal transformation intertwines with community empowerment. His story isn't just about individual success. It's about reimagining what economic justice can look like when those traditionally excluded from power bring their wisdom to reshape broken systems. Every floor Miguel polished held lessons that would eventually transform not just his life, but an entire community's relationship with financial power. The birth of neighborhood First Credit Union demanded more from Miguel than he had ever given to any endeavor. In the year following the grant award, he reduced his cleaning hours at First Capital Trust to part-time, dedicating his remaining energy to navigating the labyrinthine process of establishing a community financial institution. Regulatory hurdles arose at every turn. The banking establishment, designed to protect existing institutions, viewed their community-centered model with skepticism. Each rejection letter and request for additional documentation tested the committee's resolve. "They're hoping we'll give up," Carmen observed one evening as they reviewed yet another set of compliance requirements. "Then they don't understand who they're dealing with," Miguel replied quietly. The committee around him, predominantly working-class immigrants, women of color, and young community activists, nodded in agreement. They had spent lifetimes navigating systems designed to exclude them. Persistence wasn't just a strategy, it was a survival skill. Meanwhile, First Capital Trust decline accelerated. Another round of layoffs came, and this time Miguel wasn't spared. The severance package was minimal, a cold acknowledgement of 7 years of pre-dawn shifts and impeccable service. As he cleared out his small locker, Rosita embraced him tearfully. "What will you do now?" she asked. Miguel surprised himself with his answer. "What I should have been doing all along." That evening, he updated his resume for the first time in years, no longer hiding his education and previous experience. With the credit union still months from operation, he needed interim work. The severance would only stretch so far. Lucia found him at the kitchen table, meticulously reformatting his professional history. "You should apply to be a financial advisor," she suggested. "You've basically been doing for free at the community center for years." Her confidence in him, this child who had only ever known him as a custodian, moved something deep within Miguel. "Perhaps it's time," he agreed. The following week, he interviewed at 3 financial services firms. The first 2 were clearly uncomfortable with his unusual career trajectory, but the third, a smaller firm with a progressive reputation, saw value in his community connections and bilingual skills. "Your understanding of underserved markets is exactly what we've been missing," the hiring manager told him. "And your technical knowledge is impressive. When can you start?" For the first time in almost a decade, Miguel put on a suit and tie instead of custodial uniform. The physical transformation was striking. Lucia jokingly asked if she should call him Senor Reyes now. But the internal shift was even more profound. He was reclaiming a part of himself long suppressed, not abandoning his experiences as a custodian, but integrating them into a more complete identity. At the financial firm, Miguel quickly distinguished himself by bringing in clients who had never before sought professional financial advice. Small business owners from his neighborhood, families preparing to send the first in their generation to college, elders planning for retirement with limited resources. "How do you get them to trust you?" a puzzled colleague asked after watching Miguel spend an hour patiently explaining investment basics to a housekeeper with modest savings. Miguel smiled. By remembering what it feels like to be invisible in a financial institution. His growing professional success ran parallel to the credit union's development. Regulatory approval finally came through after 18 months of persistent advocacy. Finding suitable physical space was the next challenge. The committee wanted a location that felt accessible, not intimidating. The solution came unexpectedly. First Capital Trust, continuing its downward spiral, announced the closure of its neighborhood branch, the same building where Miguel had spent years cleaning floors. The property would be sold as part of a larger restructuring plan. When Miguel learned this, he immediately called an emergency meeting of the credit union committee. "This is our opportunity," he explained, pulling up satellite images of the location. It's centrally located, already configured for banking operations, and deeply symbolic for our community. Can we afford it? Javier asked practically. Miguel had been preparing for this moment. With our grant funding, member capital contributions, and a partnership with the Community Development Corporation, yes. But we'll need to move quickly. The next weeks passed in a blur of activity. Miguel leveraged his new position to connect with ethical investors interested in community development. Carmen mobilized neighborhood support through a crowdfunding campaign that became a statement of collective power. Hundreds of residents contributing what they could, from $5 to $5,000. When they submitted their bid for property, it wasn't the highest offer First Capital Trust received, but Miguel had done his research. The bank was under regulatory pressure to demonstrate community reinvestment as part of their restructuring. Selling to a community credit union provided valuable public relations benefits at a time when the bank desperately needed them. 3 months later, Miguel stood in the empty banking hall, where he had once pushed a mop in pre-dawn darkness. The space echoed with possibility. "It's hard to believe," Carmen said, her voice reverberating slightly in the vacant room. "We actually did it." "We're just getting started," Miguel replied. The transformation of the space became a community project. Local artisans replaced the intimidating marble counters with warm wood crafted from reclaimed materials. The imposing executive offices were converted into financial education classrooms and meeting spaces. Where velvet ropes had once created barriers, comfortable seating areas now invited conversation. On the day Neighborhood First Credit Union opened its doors, a line of new members stretched down the block. Miguel, now serving as the credit union's chief financial officer while maintaining his advisory practice, greeted each person individually. Among them was Rosita, still working as a security guard but now at a different bank across town. "I knew you were smart," she told him with a warm hug, "but I never imagined this." "Neither did I," Miguel admitted. The credit union's first year brought challenges: technology glitches, staffing adjustments, the complex balance of sound financial management with community-centered values. But it also brought triumphs. The first-time homebuyer who secured an affordable mortgage after being rejected by 3 traditional banks. The cooperative business launched with microfinancing. The elderly residents who finally moved their savings from under mattresses into secure accounts where staff spoke their language and treated them with respect. As the credit union celebrated its 2nd anniversary, Miguel received an unexpected email from Harrison Phillips, the former CEO of First Capital Trust, requesting a meeting. Curiosity piqued, Miguel agreed. They met at a cafe halfway between their offices. Phillips had aged visibly since his time at the bank, stress etching deep lines around his eyes. After awkward pleasantries, he came to the point. "I've been following what you've done with the credit union," Phillips said. "Remarkable turnaround of that location. We could never make it profitable. We measure success differently," Miguel replied simply. Phillips nodded slowly. "That's actually why I wanted to speak with you. I'm consulting for several banks now, helping them understand how to better serve diverse communities." He hesitated. "I thought perhaps you might consider joining one of their boards. They could benefit from your perspective." Miguel studied the man who had never once looked him in the eye during 7 years of cleaning his office. "My perspective," he repeated thoughtfully. "Yes, your understanding of underserved markets." Miguel recognized what was happening. The commodification of his identity and experience. The superficial inclusivity that changed nothing about underlying power structures. But he also saw an opportunity. "I appreciate the offer," he said carefully, "but my commitment is to my community and our credit union. If these banks truly want to change, perhaps their executives should spend time in our lobby, watching how we operate, listening to our members." My perspective wasn't gained in a boardroom. It was gained on the ground. Phillips seemed unsettled by the response, but nodded stiffly. As they parted ways, Miguel reflected on how different their paths had been. Phillips had climbed the traditional ladder to power, only to watch it crumble beneath him. Miguel had built a new ladder entirely, alongside his community. 5 years after opening its doors, Neighborhood first expanded to a second location in a nearby underserved area. By its 7th anniversary, It had become a model studied by community development organizations nationwide. Miguel, now serving as CEO, traveled occasionally to speak at conferences about financial inclusion, always returning gratefully to the community that had made it all possible. On the credit union's 10th anniversary, Miguel stood addressing a crowd gathered in what had once been the imposing banking hall of First Capital Trust. The space was now warm with natural light, community artwork adorning walls where bank advertisements had once hung. Staff moved among members with genuine connection, many of them neighborhood residents who had found economic security through the institution. 10 years ago, Miguel began, I cleaned these floors before dawn. I was invisible to the people who worked here, but I saw everything. How banking could exclude, intimidate, and extract wealth from communities like ours. A respectful hush fell over the room. Today, we own these floors, not just me, but all of us together as member owners of this credit union. We've proven that financial institutions can serve people rather than profit from them. We've demonstrated that community wisdom is as valuable as financial expertise, that, in fact, they must go hand in hand. Miguel gestured to the diverse group of staff and board members beside him. Carmen, now the community outreach director, Javier, who had expanded his plumbing business with credit union financing and now served on the board, Lucia, who had returned after college with a finance degree to lead their youth financial literacy program. This anniversary isn't about a building changing hands. It's about power changing hands. It's about what becomes possible when we recognize dignity and potential in everyone, including ourselves. As applause filled the room, Miguel caught sight of Eduardo, his former custodial colleague, now employed as the credit union's facilities manager. They exchanged a knowing glance. Men who had once been defined by their mops, now defined by their vision. The celebration continued into the evening, spilling onto the street in a block party that brought together credit union members, staff, and the broader community. As twilight settled over the neighborhood, Miguel found a quiet moment to step back inside the building. In the hushed, empty space, he ran his hand along a counter where he had once dusted in darkness. The journey from invisible man to community leader had not been easy or straightforward. It had required him to reclaim his own worth while simultaneously building new systems that recognized the worth in others. Tomorrow morning, he would arrive early as usual, not to clean floors but to continue building something lasting. The bank he once cleaned, he now directed with wisdom partly gained from those very years of invisibility. But more importantly, the community he had always belonged to now had a financial institution that belonged to them. The circle had closed, but the story was far from over. In fact, it was just beginning.